ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Mark Blunden, and this is The Leader.
It certainly feels like the end of an era. It all goes so quickly.
Seeing him again, it was like no time had passed at all.
Yeah, there's lots of old faces.
Neighbours, most of us have them. Hopefully yours are good. Perhaps they've even become good friends. Yeah, that's a bit cheesy now, but that was the 80s and 90s earworm theme, broadcast from down under to television sets into millions of British homes twice a day, then on BBC One. But now, amid declining viewing figures, it's all over as the long-running Australian soap ends its 37-year run, now on Channel 5, after a total of 8,903 episodes. Sure, these days you've got your never-ending buffet of online shows and films, but back in the late 80s, it was 4 channels and pretty much everyone knew what was happening in Ramsay Street. Now, this host will be among many thousands of Londoners tuning in for the first time in decades for the last episode, after it topped the ratings in Australia with 1.2 million Aussies watching. Fans gathered there to watch the final scenes at an outdoor big screen in Melbourne's Federation Square. That's the city where the show is set and produced. No spoilers here, but all the big guns are back in Erinsborough for a last hurrah. Kylie and Jason, Antipodeans known by households up and down the country simply by their first names, were so popular in the UK at the time that over a third of the population tuned in to watch their character's wedding in 1988. That's 19.6 million people watching. More on the soap couple later. The pair have joined Hollywood stars Guy Pearce, Margot Robbie, and a host of other old, reassuring faces and references, including a tribute to Bouncer the dog, and it's all part of an emotional extended finale show. Here's Delta Goodrem, best known for playing Nina Tucker between 2002 and 2005, talking to BBC Breakfast.
Oh, it's definitely really tugging on all our heartstrings, I think. The fact that so many of us have come back, it's because it's a home, and I think the street is about, it's been there throughout all of our lives.
But despite an online petition of nearly 70,000 signatures to save the show, it was not to be. And now Neighbours has, as was the euphemism when characters left fictional Erinsborough, itself moved to Brisbane. And it's gone the way of Crossroads and Brookside to the great soap's resting place, aka the internet. To decipher the significance of the poignant end of a pre-web icon, we're joined by Nick Clark, the Evening Standard's Deputy Culture Editor. So Nick, it seems we've been having a bit of a retro, cultural and quite emotional moment this week. What's your take on why?
Well, massively nostalgic is what I'd say. I haven't thought about Neighbours for 20 years, and I'm sure many in my position are the same, but seeing it come back, there's this pang of sadness that it's ending. So yes, many thoughts back to the early days of Neighbours, the 80s and 90s, and the sort of crazy storylines and the larger-than-life characters. And sort of seeing people who possibly weren't around the first time round trying to get to grips with why Neighbours was such a phenomenon has been rather amusing too. So yeah, a sort of rose-tinted walk down memory lane, really.
And please take us back to the 80s and 90s. How would you sum up that buzz around this must-see TV?
That's right. It's sort of odd to think about it now, really, given that there was no internet chat or anything like that. Neighbours was just there. I don't remember a time when I said, oh, I'm going to start watching Neighbours. It was just there. It was definitely a cultural phenomenon. If playgrounds had sort of water cooler moments, Neighbours provided these moments on an almost daily basis. And I think there were many shows sort of that aimed at the similar market, at that sort of, primary school market. But that was the one that really took hold. And I can't really explain it, possibly because of the time when it went on. It was perfect timing from when we got back from school, possibly because you could watch it with your parents if they were there at that time as well. It was a very gentle soap. But I just remember absolutely everyone knowing what was going on, knowing the characters and knowing all the storylines. It seems extraordinary, but I can't really tell you that there wasn't a sort of group decision to start watching. Everyone just kind of did.
What's your view on Neighbours' success as a pre-internet word-of-mouth phenomenon? Well,
I think it's real peer pressure stuff, isn't it? It was everyone in the playground was watching it, so you had to too. I remember on the school bus actually being very annoyed at the films and TV programs I couldn't watch that were being discussed. I remember I would have been about 12 and my parents very much did not let me watch 18-rated films. And so Die Hard had been on the night before and everyone was discussing it and I was so frustrated that I couldn't. But with Neighbours, like I say, it was so gentle. It was just ubiquitous. It was so easy to access, even for the under 12s. It just felt that everyone could watch it and everyone could discuss it. So, yeah, I think everyone who's anyone did, and it was because all of their friends were too.
And what about those characters everyone was so invested in? Who were the big names in your Neighbours heyday?
I remember Jim's death. That was a very moving moment. And when Helen left us too, I mean, Harold Bishop, a massive looming presence over Neighbours, and Lou, his sort of erstwhile buddy, and Toadfish and his brother Stonefish. It's sort of odd to think about. I mean, again, thinking about Neighbours now, 20 years on, these names sort of bubble up. And when I talk to any of my friends or people of a similar age, all these names are part of the cultural consciousness, of their consciousness. I mean, obviously Scott and Charlene. I think the first major moment would have been the wedding. I think that's the first major storyline that I remember properly, with around 87. So I was about 8 years old. I remember Des, remember Daphne. I seem to remember Daphne might have met an untimely end in a rather unusual way, but I can't quite remember on that. But yes, and then of course, Carl and Susan, who, as I understand it, are still going strong right up until the end. It's something like almost 30 years.
Of course, Harold and Lou. They were love rivals for Madge, I seem to remember.
Indeed. I tell you, I would defy anyone not to remember the Harold storyline of being swept away to sea, only to emerge 5 years later as Ted playing a tube for the Salvation Army. I mean, these are cultural references that are absolutely chiseled into my mind, and I'm sure anyone else of a certain age who's listening.
Let's go to the ads. Please do stay there to hear more about the end of an era in Erinsborough and from Kylie and Jason themselves. Welcome back. Nick, of course, before Neighbours, the other Aussie soaps were the likes of The Sullivans and Sons and Daughters, but Neighbours gave us something different, a bit more exotic, a bit more glamorous.
Absolutely, and I think you're right when you're mentioning Sons and Daughters and The Sullivans. It felt like it skewed slightly older. It didn't really appeal. I mean, I remember the sort of quite dour colour schemes and remember not ever wanting to watch them. And I think, as I said, with Neighbours, it had younger people in it. It was a bit more colourful. It was, I think, it was really exotic. It was a soap where you'd love to visit. To put it frankly, you'd love to sit in the sun of Erinsborough with those people. They were sort of comic, broadly drawn and not really threatening characters. I mean, there was never really huge amounts of conflict. I mean, obviously there was to keep the soap going, but I think it wasn't the most threatening soap in the world. And I think, again, for a primary schooler, introducing you to the world of to the fun world of Australia, I think it shaped a whole generation's view on Australia as this sort of fun-loving, sun-soaked place that we'd all like to visit.
We spoke earlier about Scott and Charlene. That's, of course, Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan, the golden couple of the soap who were among the famous faces reprising their roles. The character's wedding was the telly event of the year for us youngsters, and it seems unimaginable now that so many people would tune in like that. What are your reflections on that time?
Well, it was pure event TV, wasn't it? Neighbours had really hit by that stage, and this was the biggest event, the biggest show for us, certainly. I mean, I'm sure there were bigger shows for other people watching, but Neighbours was certainly mine and my friends' go-to show. And so there was no way we were going to miss Kylie and Jason. And of course, with their growing pop careers, I remember, I don't know which way around it was, but being absolutely obsessed by Kylie. So it all sort of fed in to it, I think. But yeah, this was event TV when we had 4 channels. There wasn't a huge amount else to be watching, certainly not that time of day. So while those numbers are mind-boggling now, I can, looking back into an analogue world, I can sort of understand it. This was the big news.
And speaking of which, here's the soap superstar couple themselves, actually in Ramsay Street.
I didn't really say it happening, but now that it is happening, it feels right.
It feels good. It's a homage rather than a sort of a big moment, I think, and Kylie's right in the sense that because the show's finishing, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think I explained to you, or, wrote an email at one point saying, to try and recreate the past is very difficult. This is not trying to recreate the past, this is actually just giving a nod to those characters and what the street's done for us.
Come on, admit it, you never thought that reunion would happen when Kylie and Jason left Ramsay Street in 1988 and 1989 respectively to pursue their pop careers.
We're connected anyway, but he sent me a really nice email and you just put it so beautifully and eloquently and so heartfelt, which made sense to me about this being a moment to, for us to acknowledge and really enjoy, but to say thanks to
The fans. Yeah.
We're straight out of school kids, and a lot of life has happened since then.
And we have to know, how's the fashion changed?
One thing hasn't changed though is denim. The denim has got better.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And the curls are just as big, and the mousse is back.
Yeah.
So Nick, why did your Neighbours watching career come to an end?
Well, I grew up and got a job, I suppose. After primary school, I would say was my prime Neighbours watching years, but I kept up with it in secondary school. And actually, as a nostalgic return, during university, it was a very good bookmark. Sometimes even twice a day, it was a sort of good bookmark at lunch and at the end of the day for the studies. So actually, I was still up until I left university, and that was in 2003. But sadly, the first job I got started at 8 in the morning and finished about 6:30 at night. So my Neighbours watching was put firmly to the end of the road. That was it for me.
And finally, thanks very much for your time. Will you be among the masses of Londoners tuning in for the finale?
Absolutely will be tuning in. I was thinking about this, and the more I thought about it, I tell you why. It's because, for exactly the reason of what we're discussing now, it's a walk down memory lane. It's looking at all the characters who are coming back and seeing what they look like now. I mean, it's not for the storylines. It's basically waving goodbye. I was thinking, it's really sad that Neighbours is finishing. But then I thought, no, actually, it's clearly the right time. I mean, it hasn't found its audience now, not in the same ways as it used to. And the people who love it are like me in their 40s and not watching it anymore. So giving it a great send-off is sort of saying farewell to the 80s and 90s and sort of farewell to our lost childhoods as well. So yeah, I absolutely will be tuning in and waving goodbye to, Harold and Scott and Charlene and everyone else.
There's more on this story in the Evening Standard newspaper and online at standard.co.uk. That's The Leader. We're back on Monday at 4 p.m.